Hey folks, this is Rick from Lincoln Vlogs. I wanted to address another issue here before we ran out of time this year and see how it plays out. This has to do with air travel in the new millennium, which has become a bit of a joke, if you hadn't noticed lately. There are some issues of concern that I thought I'd bring to the public's attention to see if in fact there was a consensus as to the matter. First of all, which has to do with airplane travel, what's bothering me is the airplane technology today, of course, is stagnant. If anything, we have regressed given the advancement of other technologies in comparison. Let's look at the broader perspective as well as the historical record for some context. Leave it to the Greeks to be the first. This foreign land was a breeding ground for much of the early advancement of mankind on the planet. Science, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, democracy, art, mechanical engineering, cartography, and yes, the Olympics were just some of the greatest inventions devised and created by the Greeks. There were other cultures and civilizations who had also contributed to the evolution of man here on Earth, but the Greeks really influenced the future Western cultures the most. As early as 400 BC, records indicate that Archytas conceived and built the first flying craft that appeared to be made into the shape of a bird. Wings were fixed, and the propulsion system was believed to be that of steam. Flight was achieved, but never beyond the testing stage. Over the centuries, man imagined and built a wide variety of machines and devices to stimulate flight, but it would be millennia before the concept was refined. Balloons, gliders, and even a man-powered machine was developed by Leonardo da Vinci. Most were more effective on paper. As described in previous writings, it wasn't until the industrialization of the world during the latter centuries of the first millennium did man take the matter seriously. Power and physics combined to force a machine to fly in the 19th and early 20th century. Officially, it was the Wright brothers in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903. They were the first to sustain flight and landings without mishap. What's more important to understand here is that man developed his knowledge and expertise from his predecessors. For millennia, humans built civilizations and cultural advancements based on what they learned from one another through writings, education, and the historical record. There was much to learn from the ancient civilizations. To this day, man is continually attempting to reverse engineer the pyramids. More troubling is the fact that many cultural achievements were stricken from the records because some beliefs and early findings did not match the agendas of more contemporary cultures. Nostradamus was ostracized by those who dominated Western medicine, in spite of the fact that he successfully treated those sickened by the Black Plague. His unusual methods were considered taboo by those who held the power of the time, even though the traditional doctors of the period were unsuccessful in coping with the massive deaths, piles of bodies. Nostradamus walked among the infected and the cured and cured their conditions. He was highly recognized for his amazing accomplishments, but in the end, feared for himself and his family's welfare from those who would have the most to lose by his continued presence. Numerology and astrology are sciences dating back millennia, and yet today they've been relegated to the entertainment pages of online and print media. People once lived their lives by these castings, but not today. With time, industrialization, and war, man recognized the importance of aircraft. Carrier pigeons and balloons were out. Biplanes and single fixed-winged airplanes were decidedly advantageous. Jet engines were the next evolutionary step in the process, brought on by the needs of warfare once again until 1952 when the first jet airliner was produced and placed into service. However, this is where we run into trouble. In 1958, the first Boeing 707 commercial jet airliner was developed and utilized until 2003. Not all that long ago. Subsequently, larger craft were built to handle more passengers over greater distances. However, aside from the advancements inside the passenger compartments and larger runways to accommodate these huge machines, the time to fly from point A to point B remains stagnant. As any passenger that has flown in the past 2 decades can attest, heavy security delays and boarding backlogs has contributed to all-day affairs when it comes to air travel. One would normally be very curious as to why the lack of advancements in the industry is prevalent if we're not for a few simple facts. Passengers are sheep, and the industry has consolidated their positions to the point whereby their competition has been eliminated. Routes and routines have been honed to the smallest denominator of cost and expense. Aside from the CapEx expenditure, fuel remains the dominant variable. Give the sheep some headphones, cram them into a small stall so that they cannot move, and then give them a movie to lull them to sleep, and nothing further needs to be done. Essentially, since 1960, or for 57 years, air travel remains static. New York to Los Angeles is still 6.5 hours of flying time. Yeah, are you serious? Yes, damn serious. Add to that at least 3 hours of prep time before takeoff, and we have regressed as a species. Personally, I find this appalling if it were not for where we are in today's world of corporate control and antitrust manipulations. Yes, similar to Obamacare, it's hurry up and wait. What has your government done for you lately? Of course, we have terrorism to thank for much of the security concerns and costs related to air travel that we can factor into the overall regression of the industry. Although this may have only been a handful of incidents, their effects will be felt for decades to come. The circumstances surrounding the 2 most infamous incidents of terrorism and sleight of hand by the government was September 11, 2001, and then, of course, there was the infamous Flight 800 out of JFK International Airport in New York. Both tragedies have all the markings of the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Did you notice that? Including the blindfolded, gagged, and handcuffed Warren Commission. Instead, these most recent articles that demonstrate the kinds of issues air travelers have to deal with today, instead of how much faster they would be arriving at their destination. You've seen these articles perhaps online and in the news. First one's from Fox News. Southwest Airlines tech issues are preventing people from booking flights. The software needed to manage the mobile data in today's world has become very sophisticated, with passengers' expectations increasing with each new cell phone that hits the market. The airline industry cannot keep up, as it appears that they are testing these systems in real time, which tends to aggravate the traveler even more when the system breaks down from overload and glitches. This is the newest phenomenon. This just happened recently. Headline: over 15,000 scheduled American Airlines flights do not have pilots during the busy holiday season. Okay, once again, we have technical difficulties within the airline construct, which essentially locked out the free flow of scheduling information and data of future flights with available pilots for the upcoming holiday season. Arguably one of the most lucrative times of the year for the airline industry. On the other hand, one could easily make the case that the industry is perpetrating these snafus in support of the argument I'm making in this writing at this time in history of commercial flying, which is that the few that are in control of the many. The passenger is given the subliminal message that the industry is sincerely trying to maintain their technologies, when in fact they continue to milk the system for what it is, archaic and out of date, to keep their stockholders happy and fat for another business cycle. The fleet is aging, and so is air travel. This was another classic story. Just recently, Randy Zuckerberg slams American Airlines for allowing a passenger to make lewd sexual remarks during flight. You can't make this stuff up. Incidents like this one here have become all too common on airlines today. Maybe not specifically lewd talk to another unwilling passenger, but problems between passengers and airline employees on many flights. Recently, there was a rash of situations whereby one major airline had taken overbooking practices to a whole new level, then summarily booting passengers from their flight after they had been seated and ready for takeoff. Sometimes the passengers had to be forcibly removed as if it were the passenger's fault. In this instance, Ms. Zuckerberg was told by the flight attendant that the passenger making these remarks to her was well known by the airlines and that she should just tolerate the lewd behavior or change seats. What did you just say? Yes, another dumb response by the airline that is insensitive and has no interest in altering their own behavior. In a personal story, I was traveling to Africa last fall and had taken a KLM flight from Atlanta, Georgia to Amsterdam, the Netherlands. The flight was jammed with people from what appeared to be from all walks of life as well as a variety of ages, although my sense was the majority of those on board were seniors. Seats were tiny and uncomfortable for a 9-hour flight. The row configuration in economy was 3 seats in one section on either side of the plane and a 4-seat section in the middle. I happened to get stuck with a seat in an aisle because the previous flight I was scheduled to take had been canceled, so I was out of luck and left with the scraps. One of the flight attendants was particularly annoying because she had extra wide hips. And with every pass up and down my aisle, my right shoulder was slammed by her full back hips. Of course, this was not the main issue. There was another incident that had happened during the flight, which was cause for concern since I don't travel all that much. Approximately halfway through the flight, the captain made the announcement that there was a medical emergency on board the plane, and he had asked if there were any medical personnel on board. The police come forward, speak with a flight attendant. The lights had already been dimmed inside the plane. It was already dark outside. Most window coverings had been drawn down. There was clearly a commotion behind me, which I assumed to be the emergency, but difficult to ascertain with all the passengers up and about using the plane's facilities. This matter had me thinking about how vulnerable we were at 30-some thousand feet in the air over the Atlantic somewhere. The situation could have resulted in the plane being diverted to the closest international airport, which I couldn't even imagine where that could have been, let alone the time and delay. Also, what was equally as disturbing was the fact that there were as many as 375 people on board a 9-hour flight and with no known medical personnel on board. Extremely disturbing. Of course, this had nothing to do with the fact that the flight from Atlanta to Amsterdam is still at least 9 hours long and has been for many decades. Continuing this story, we did not have one medical emergency on board, but we had, yes, another. The captain made a second announcement about an hour or two after the first, and he made the same inquiry about whether or not there was a medical professional on board, which was even more bizarre than the first request. What, he forgot the first doctor or nurse's name already? This is insanity. The second passenger was directly behind me, maybe by a row or 3. They apparently just tumbled out of their seat and onto the floor. I couldn't distinguish whether they collapsed or fell asleep and then fell over. But the seats were small enough that a shoe tree was necessary just to get into the seat. These matters seem to be important as well as disturbing to me as the occasional traveler, so I'm not certain how they are received by mainstream traveling public. My suspicion is that they should be disturbing to all passengers on elongated international flights. One would think that Fox News had it in for Alaskan Airlines. Here's another issue that the industry is dealing with instead of more efficient air travel. In-flight groping aboard Alaskan Airlines lands Oregon woman probation. A quote from the article, an Oregon woman will likely receive 3 years of probation after smuggling booze aboard a commercial flight last year and licking and groping a fellow passenger, according to court documents. Okay, here's another one. Fox News, plane diverted. Flight attendant quits after passenger threatened to pee on the floor. Apparently, this dispute was between a rowdy passenger, some friends on board, and a flight attendant during a flight from England to Amsterdam. The passenger made an issue of when to use the facilities on the plane flight and when to comply with the rules. The flight was diverted, and the man and his friends were escorted off the plane by police. The flight attendant quit her job after the incident. She was so distraught. There's no wonder the traveling public is mum over the lack of advancements in the industry because the passengers wouldn't know any better way since this behavior has become so pervasive. The arrogance of the industry is no better. Perhaps we are previewing mankind as a whole with this mistreatment of one another. There is very little civility remaining in the world. However, being crammed and vacuum packed into a tin can with seats is no wonder. And this appalling behavior is preceded only by the burdensome security measures one must endure prior to flying the flying tin can. I'm just wondering, is anyone listening? Because now, of course, we had the most recent current event where the woman arguably was bumped by Representative Lee out of California, out of her first class seat. And of course, United is claiming that she deleted her flight because the original flight had been postponed. Well, if that were the case, then why did the lady show up at the ticket counter trying to get on board the flight if she had already canceled it? So really, you just have to wonder about all of this. But hey, that's my opinion. I could be wrong, but it's rare. Thank you. Happy